Welcome to our podcast, which is Top Voices. And today's recording or today's podcast is an unusual one in that it's a combined podcast. The first version of it was recorded. We're very lucky today to have Tommaso Rossi, who's the Director of Localization at Spotify, with us. And we did the original recording in September with myself, Paula McGrath. I'm the CEO, the owner, and I also still run International Achievers Group. And then my partner in crime in this is Bruno Herrmann. And Bruno is one of the leading voices and one of the best known voices in the whole industry. And then, as I mentioned to you, we're here today, we're with Tommaso Rossi. So we've had the opportunity, because Tomaso is in Dublin today, we're now in October. Tomaso is in Dublin today with his team, and there were one or two minor technical glitches in the original recording. So we've decided to take the opportunity to come back into the studio. Now, Bruno, unfortunately, is not with us today, but is in the rest of the podcast. And there's myself and Tomaso sitting, and we've decided to revisit the parts of the podcast where there were some minor technical issues. So thank you for joining us in sunny Dublin. So I've explained to you who I am, and obviously Bruno and Tomaso, but the purpose of this podcast is to invite leading voices in the industry to come in and chat with us and explain ideally the best way to improve working relationships within the industry, in how people on the supplier side can possibly engage more effectively with the buyer. Additionally, we always have a huge interest in how the individual has progressed through their career, and if they have any words of wisdom or advice for individuals that are in the industry already or considering getting into the industry on how to progress. So we're going to start, I suppose, with you, Tomaso. Maybe you'll share with us about yourself and your own role, how you ended up in this industry. Did you intentionally follow a path in localization? Did you end up in localization via some other route? So if you're happy to get started, maybe you'll just share with us whatever you're comfortable to share.
Thank you for having me here. I'm truly honored. I'm, a little bit about myself. I am Italian and born and raised in Milan, and I studied there interpreting and translation. Okay. It was a interesting experience. However, coming out of the university, I don't think anybody's prepared for what the localization industry is actually like. A lot of people, they just dream of becoming a linguist. Yeah. I very quickly found out what that meant, and I found it fascinating, very interesting, and I wanted to experience it a bit more. So I started to experience some role into the operation management in a small agency, in a small SLVs, and then I moved to Brussels, and I was very quickly propelled into a completely different environment. I found myself surrounded by a lot of companies belonging to the localization industry, and with a lot of opportunities and a lot of new things to learn. So I basically found myself fascinated and passionate about localization and all the industry that it was being built around it. The localization industry offered me so many opportunities. I first had a run in the operational roles. I was an operation manager. I worked a little bit in tech. I was lucky enough to be part of a company who started to work with Language Weaver, which was one of the first statistical machine translation engine. Okay. And we started playing with it. It was fascinating how to see this piece of technology evolving and becoming so important and significant for the work of everybody in the industry. And I worked for quite large companies who had important clients such as Toyota, Microsoft, and Google. And I also got exposed to the world of large clients requiring localization. At that time, around 10 to 15 years ago, the companies like Google and Microsoft were literally leading, in my opinion, the localization industry from in terms of practices, in terms of metrics and tools and technologies and processes. Microsoft created their own tools such as Helium and a few others. They had their own glossaries. They obviously have their own machine translation. And so on and so forth. And Google did exactly the same. So looking at those giants requiring localization and designing localization according to their requirements was definitely something that I found very interesting on one side, and obviously something that at one point I wanted to become part of. So it happened that a headhunter found me and moved me from Brussels to London and offered me a job at Expedia to look after their outsourced operations in the localization team. And that for me was probably one of the biggest life-changing experience in my career. I found a fantastic mentor working for in that company, and so many talented people around me that taught me so much. I stayed in the company for more or less a decade, and I even took a leap in that company to get out of localization and focus on my functional role as vendor manager to build a vendor management department inside the B2B part of Expedia, which was a fascinating experience, and it lasted a few years and it taught me so much. But eventually, a few years ago, the localization team in Expedia was looking for a new leader, and I felt it was time for me to return back to where I came from and where I belonged. I thought, and I got the job, and I started leading the localization team at Expedia, and from there I recently moved from Expedia to Spotify. So as you can see, I have gone through a lot of changes, which helped me be quite resilient on that matter.
Yeah.
And I have covered many different roles in many different stages of the supply chain in the localization industry, from the freelancer to the buyer, going through small agencies or larger MLVs, and moving around and horizontally between operation, vendor management, tech, and strategy and leadership. All this kind of made me who I am today, and I hope that I managed to acquire as much experience as possible to be able to bring it to a company like Spotify.
That's wonderful. I'm just also listening to you. You've gone through sort of obviously the technical training around the language skills and whatever, but then also you've had the opportunity and obviously the skill set to embrace the effect of sort of the commercial impact that your technical skills can bring to an organisation. That sounds really good. Now, I'm no technical expert, which would take anybody about 10 seconds to identify, but thankfully Bruno will explore this area in much more detail than I will. But I suppose a question I have, obviously the last sort of 24 months has actually, particularly with the famous introduction of the AI, we actually have a joke, we call it AI bingo. Who can mention AI the most often? But it's actually had a huge impact on the industry, on every industry. But how has it impacted on you, on your job, and how different is your job now compared to what it would have been, regardless of the organisation that you work for, than it would have been 24 months ago?
Yes, definitely AI has a huge impact on everybody's job today, and I am not an exception. Let me take maybe a little bit of step back in order to reach the answer to this question. I think I am part of an organization that is heavily impacted by AI.
Yeah.
Spotify is obviously both interested, fascinated, and quite oriented towards technology. It is a technology company, after all. And in the organization, everybody is extremely interested and focused on understanding how to leverage at best this technology in any possible field. Obviously with attention, with care, ethically, but definitely interested. So being part of an organization that already gives so much importance to this, I am obviously no exception, both personally and as an employee. As a localization leader, I believe it is my responsibility and duty to pick up this topic and try to make the best out of it.
Yeah.
Now, when it came out 18 months ago as if it's not something that didn't exist before, but it became a thing, and it's something that nobody can ignore anymore. 18 months ago, I think I found myself quite surprised and a little bit amused by the two different sides, almost like a football supporters setup of people scared and resistant and people oriented and pushing towards that direction. I don't love the idea of being resistant to something that is here, is going to happen, and it's actually quite useful. It's not an enemy, and it's not anything that is we can make disappear in a snap of fingers. I am old enough to remember when the translation memories arrived, and then I'm old enough to remember when machine translation arrived, and the result, the reaction, it was exactly the same. I was a translator. Translation memories arrived. Trados arrived, and everybody was absolutely appalled by how can a company make us work with a piece of technology or a tool when I am an artist and I'm a translator and I can never be replaced by a robot. 20 years later, we are
fear. That's just fear.
Right. 20 years later, we are. Nobody would ever think about working without a translation memory. Or, I mean, now with AI maybe,
yes.
but that's a different story. So all this to say, I think that the technology is here to stay. I think that we need to consider it, to leverage it, to value it, and to respect it at the same time in order to make sure that it's used in the right way. In my job specifically, I look at it on two different levels. The first one is efficiency. How the technology can help me go faster, help me be more efficient, more cost effective, can help the resources that work for the Spotify localization projects to be more effective in what they do, and potentially to produce better quality with less efforts. So that is obviously one level. The other level is obviously the idea of leveraging AI to open up doors that so far have not been considered because they were either not scalable, not affordable, or simply not possible.
True.
In that matter, for example, I think that Spotify has the opportunity to consider two types of content on our table. The one content, which is what I call the company content, which is the company that we write and we produce, like the UI and the marketing and the advertisement, which is our own content to function and to be successful. But then there is the service content. So all our verticals, music, audiobooks, podcasts, and courses, they are content. Now, music doesn't need to be localized. It's a universal code, fortunately, and beautifully. But there are other aspects such as podcasts or audiobooks that definitely go through a one-way street in terms of language offering right now. If I record a podcast like I'm doing today, this podcast is going to be in English.
Yes, it is.
And if someone doesn't speak English and sits in a different country, they will not be able to listen to it. Now, with AI, there might be the opportunity for us to make this content available through multiple techniques, which have not been considered today because either they were too expensive and too complicated and laborious, or simply because it was impossible. And today it might be. Again, I want to be very clear and make sure that we talk about using technology with ethics and with care and respect, because in my opinion, in our history of human beings, we have sometimes thrown technology out in the markets without thinking about the repercussions and the effects that technology has on the world, and that's not acceptable. We have seen, for example, in the past, multiple scandals sometimes of celebrities or important personalities complaining or fairly rejecting the use of their voice to say something that they have not said because they have been synthesized and utilized without their consent. This is not a respectful and ethical use of technology. So we look at technology, we want to use it, leverage it, and respect it in order to create something good and useful and positive.
I think that those challenges around commerce and ethics has been a problem or a challenge or a consideration for many, many, many generations. You can do all sorts of courses nowadays on philosophy and ethics and technology. So
100%. Yeah. But I also think that it's very important to remember, going back to the original question, that how AI impacted my role and my job is not necessarily only how do I use it to translate, but I can use AI to go beyond translation and to synthesize, automate, streamline, and generate sometimes content. I believe there is a lot of potential, and everybody is basically buzzing about what is the best way to leverage this potential and to make the best out of it. It sounds a little bit like competition. For me, it's more about literally partnering together to understand how to figure that out.
Well, I definitely would see it that way. But also we all have to be ready at all times for changes that are coming, because if we're not,
agreed,
we're actually walking through life with our eyes closed.
Exactly. So. And I remember a lot of translators back in the day not willing to use the translation memory, that eventually had to learn it or change career because they didn't want to fall into that path. And I think it's too bad, because I don't think that being a translator means necessarily exclusively using your brain. You can use technology as help. Simply typing on a computer is leveraging technology, right? We're not writing with a pen anymore when we translate. So I guess it goes obviously in different nuances. And I do understand and respect the concern that some linguists might have on, is this replacing me? I don't think the technology will replace a linguist. But I do think that the technology will get better and better, and that means that they will help us do something that today is only a human effort. Okay. In the future can be a combination.
I think it's probably over to you. It's a good opportunity for you to ask all the difficult questions.
Difficult? No, exciting questions. Exciting.
True.
No, and what you said, Tommaso, really resonates with me, because you explained your progress in the industry, and there are two things that are really resonating with me. Is that you started more on the tactical side, and then you moved to the strategic side. And you said yourself that you moved to a more functional role, a more leading role. Actually, leadership. It's about leadership at the end. And the other thing that really resonates a lot with me, because that's also where I've been, and I'm still today, is actually at the crossroad between technology, product, and content. You are managing those three dimensions, if I can use that term, and you are operating, you are leading. As you said yourself, understanding products, leveraging technology, and also producing content. So these are the three things that are so important. And so one of the difficult or exciting questions I wanted to ask you first is that obviously in the past in Expedia and today in Spotify, you have to manage this balance between people, business processes, and technology. I will start with people. I will dive into technology in a minute, but let's start with people. What is your I would say your main challenge, or what has been your main challenge when you were at Expedia in terms of people, not just people management, but people leadership, finding the right talent, retaining the talent, and making sure that your team was not just delivering, but was actually, shaped according to the need of the business?
The answer is a bit complex, so let me try to go through it, because the whole aspect of people management has a lot of nuances. First of all, I think that one of the things that I had to learn very quickly is try to find the right balance between what I need to produce in-house and what I need to outsource. A lot of colleagues of mine have been sharing their experience with me, and I kind of I grabbed the opportunity to learn very quickly that on the buyer side, running operations is not necessarily the most complicated part. The most complicated part is to position your services localization into the company and try to understand how to make the company realize how important localization is for their business and how we can make a difference. Now, that links into people management in terms of this is where you want to invest your talent research and your people management on how I can make the business successful and try to outsource what is outsourceable and mechanical and easier with an external partner. So keeping your resources internal wherever they can make a difference for the company and for the localization service inside the company. The other part is I'm always a very big advocate for balance and compromise. And when looking for talent, I always mix up a set of certification and knowledge on paper with the right person, with the right cultural approach that I am looking for. It needs to be a very good fit for the company that I represent and for the team that I lead, together with the knowledge and the experience and expertise that they bring in. From a people management point of view, there are two aspects that I also learned from in my career that I always keep in mind when I recruit people. The first one is that I always try to recruit a bit higher than the level that I'm looking for, because the purpose is to try to have the person hired always almost ready for the promotion right away. Yeah. That, in my opinion, is something that I learned thanks to some of the mentorship that I received in my Expedia career, because it makes the induction and the beginning of this person's role in my team much easier and much more impressive for the company. The other part is that I always try to surround myself by people who are extremely different from me, both from a career and an expertise point of view, but also from a personality point of view. I encourage diversity in all type of situations because it's what makes things more interesting, more useful, more complete, and it's a very rich experience to be surrounded by people that think differently from you, work differently from you, and operate in a different way. Obviously, it's harder to balance and coordinate things, but with the right approach, with the right behavior and personality, in my opinion, that's where the value is. These two things are extremely important to me when I recruit, and I want to make sure that what I am recruiting and hiring is absolutely necessary for the company and is bringing the value that I foresee for the role. From a recruitment, a people management point of view, of course, obviously, happy people are productive people. Everybody knows that. So there is a very important portion of working with the people that you're around to make sure that they have everything they are going through a positive and interesting career path. They are not, and nothing in their role needs to fall into the mechanical and transactional rhythm of I come to work because I'm paid and I deliver what I'm asked and then I go home. There needs to be a little bit of a interest in moving the bar farther away every time, and make sure that they understand the impact that they are having with their jobs and their efforts on the company and on the business that we are all trying to make successful.
Mm-hmm. Do you mind if I just ask a question?
Go ahead.
It's just when you mentioned there that you like to try and hire individuals or teams at a level higher than is really needed, and you're working for this particular role and your previous role very, very well respected and very well known brands. if you were to advise smaller organizations, be in the tech field or maybe the supplier side of things, the LSPs, and they don't actually have either the financial resources or, more importantly, the brand strength to attract those big players, what advice might you, or do you feel comfortable in getting into that space? Because that's something that a lot of smaller organizations actually need to move their business to the next level, are the big players. But a lot of the big players want to be with the big brands.
It's definitely an extremely big challenge. I think that potentially the incredibly strict scrutiny on hiring the right talent that is potentially the next future leader or has incredible potential it would be my advice. So if there is no way to target someone who has already a very, very high level of experience and expertise documented in the field, going into someone junior, but identify who is actually the next rock star, and try to attract that personality and that person and let them grow inside the organization. I do a little bit of mentorship every now and then with other companies that are smaller realities, LSPs and smaller tech companies, and I find interesting to identify how, for example, the people that I agree to mentor are people that I actually believe in, and I think that they have an incredible potential, and they are capable of doing amazing things, and I see them grow in their role from the role I had when they were when they came out of uni or from the last professional experience, and all of a sudden they become this incredible personality in the industry, and I can totally see how their career path is going to shine, and they're going to be propelled into the industry soon. That kind of, in my opinion, that kind of resources are the one that, if I were a smaller company with less resources, I would try to target and to bring in as quickly as possible. People who are potentially less used to segment their work into, this is my role, this is what I do, and if I need something else, I need someone who do it. But some of those people that are used to say, well, I'm a project manager, but if I have to vendor manager a little bit or be a bit more savvy on tech and innovation, I will, and try to grow their knowledge, their personality, and their expertise wherever it needs to go inside the company.
Something that I do speak a lot about with organizations that work with us or that talk with us to see if they want to work with us is about presenting the employer of choice message. So regardless of what size you are, if you have 20 staff or 200 staff or 2,000 staff, but in order to get that message effectively, it requires time and a particular focus. And sometimes I see it that organizations either don't have the skills to do that, don't set aside the time to do that, and underestimate the value of doing that. Because we all do it when we're trying to identify our target market to sell our services to. So anyhow, that's my...
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting point, because circling back on the human value or the human aspect of the business, there is something that, as an outsider, there are three adjectives that could be used to label Expedia and Spotify. It is technology enabled, data driven, and innovative, right? If I take those two adjectives, so data driven and technology enabled, today, of course, it's all about AI. We know that. And the challenge is, of course, to position the human value with this new AI-driven framework. Is that, okay, how can you keep some human value in the supply chain? When you look at, a product or a piece of content, where do you put or where do you change the value of human beings with technology? So working with AI. So not working instead of AI, but working with AI. And so I'm just interested in knowing, in your shoes today at Spotify, or even in your previous shoes at Expedia, as a buyer, did you face any challenge or issue, to find, suppliers that could be following you as a buyer in terms of human value with technology?
Yes, thank you, Bruno, for the question. It's quite a topic for a person in my role. As a buyer on the buyer side, yes, this is quite a challenge. I did experience some challenges and some complications in both companies. I remember. And I kind of categorized a little bit this in two different behaviors. Very often, either we have in front of us a external partner, a vendor who does not embrace technology that much, and in that case, they push the human value and the human effort way forward, way farther than we actually want it, and that makes it obviously more expensive and slower and more complicated to manage. On the other hand, we have sometimes suppliers and vendors that push technology a bit too far, and they pitch the idea of simply using technology without the human control, without the human quality, without the human framework that sometimes is required by our localization needs. I think I know it sounds very cheesy and cheeky, but I think that obviously the truth is in the middle, and most importantly, the middle. It doesn't have to be exactly in the middle between these two positions, but it needs to be in a compromise that suits the specific profile of the buyer. The ideal supplier, the ideal vendor, is the company that sits in front of the buyer and tries to really understand them and try to understand what the requirements are, where the quality needs to go, what kind of cost effectiveness is required, what kind of process simplicity or complexity is accepted and tolerated, what technology is available, what knowledge the buyer has already on their side, what purpose the content that is being localized has for the company, because that is very important to define how to localize it and what kind of language to use. So I believe the best partner, external partner, the best vendor for me to work with is a vendor that looks inside what I need and what I'm sharing with them and tries to understand what are the best solutions and options that I can consider in order to make that happen.
Okay.
Now, when I was working with external vendors, and I still am, I love the idea that on one hand I receive a lot of questions and I receive a lot of inquiries on what I might need and what is happening on the buyer side, what is our strategy, what is our vision for the future. That is extremely important, and it's always interesting and useful to ask. A buyer like Spotify or like Expedia or many other company might decide to share or not a certain amount of information, but it is always interesting and important to ask. On the other side, the other opportunity is also to showcase and expose the client to other opportunities that might be happening with other clients. That, in my opinion, is extremely valuable, because there are things that an external vendor is doing with other clients that I might not have even thought about, and I might be sitting on an opportunity, but I don't know how to frame it or grasp it. And a vendor who is maybe doing something similar with another company might actually have the solution right there, and I don't know about it because there is a lack of communication and sharing. So that's, for me, very important, which goes into the fact that I spend a fair amount of time vendor managing, as I mentioned at the beginning, and I've always advocated to move as far as possible, whenever applicable and appropriate, from the transactional supplier client relationship, and to instead try to build a mutually beneficial relationship, a partnership, instead of a supply chain relationship. And that is something that I found interesting, and very useful because it brought value to the relationship we were building between the two companies. It brought results and it brought benefits, of course.
Okay.
And funnily enough, to also leverage a little bit the terminology used, it made it a bit more human.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit less robotic. It's not an invoice passing, a money exchange, but it's simply a matter of people sitting in front of each other, talking to each other, and try to understand how we can mutually benefit each other on this opportunity, and try to share our knowledge and experience for the other's benefit. I talk about transparency a lot when it goes into the relationship between the client and vendor, because I believe that giving transparency means trust,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
means sharing, and means knowledge and experience. And I think that's absolutely valuable and important. And that goes both ways, meaning that a client can try to be as transparent as possible. Sometimes that cannot happen 100%, but at least to a certain extent. And that means sharing views, strategies, priorities, even something that it might be coming in 12 or 18 months that maybe it's not worth it talk about it right now, but it might be useful because if I put it on the table right now, we can leave it there. But at the other side of the table, my external partner might start
Yes.
thinking about it, brainstorming, cooking something on their side that can be useful in 12 or 18 months' time. So that's something very, very useful. On the other side, for example, the transparency that I request back is for external partners to show me when they are in troubles, when they're struggling, when they have problem. Shielding me from their problems is not always the best solution, because if something happens, I will still turn my face and towards the external partner and say, what happened?
Yeah.
Why didn't you tell me before? Yeah. If your trusted resource that usually work on my project is currently out on leave,
sick.
Tell me about it. Don't hide and add the 2 layers of quality just to make sure that everything is fine. Because if something goes wrong and then you explain to me that is the reason why it went wrong, my level of trust start degrading and dropping, because because all of a sudden I see that you're not talking to me in the way that we used to, or I'm trying to at the other side. So transparency for me is very important.
An age-old skill is listening skills.
Absolutely.
Now, even if you can listen, it's also very useful if you can contextualize effectively. But the number one step is listening.
Very true. And building trust on each other goes a million miles away. Meaning it's very important. The moment that the trust and the image of the counterpart start degrading is where things are going to start shaking, because it all of a sudden there is a less will to invest on the buyer side in increasing and growing the relationship. There is no, and there is always a concern in the back of our head on I'm outsourcing this. Is it gonna be okay, or I'm gonna be in another trouble like the one the one we had last month, and so on and so forth. And at the other side of the table, I am sure is exactly the same, because I'm going to stop sharing a lot of things, meaning that the external party is not going to understand and contextualize some of our ask, demand, the behaviors, and the requests.
The truth as well is that all buyers have somebody to report to as well. Oh, everybody who's sitting in your seat or the equivalent of your seat in all companies have somebody to report to, whether they're the owner of the business, or they have an owner above them, or they have the bank, or they have somebody above them. So it's
100%.
important to bear that in mind, that it's everybody's life and career, and that's my thoughts on it. It's important.
Very true.
So I suppose it's 2 things actually that I want to have a quick chat with you about. Is you use the word transparency. I personally have a problem with that word. I brought this up with some other poor person that we were speaking to. And the word transparency in business is something that's only been used in the last, I'm an old woman here, but the word transparency in business is only something that people were using in the last 20 years. And I find it interesting that we have to even use the word transparency, because the truth is that if we are the proper business partnership, there's never an issue around transparency, and the time that it's no longer the right partnership, the transparency doesn't matter. I mean, I just find it interesting that we now use that word. Now, I could be being a bit overly pedantic, but it's just something that interests me. That I think it's.
I guess when it comes into terminology, I guess being working in the language industry, I always try to find make the exercise of what the opposite means.
Yeah.
So if we're not transparent, very often, in my opinion, it means that we are hiding behind either an image or a concept, or basically we're trying to sell something to the buyer that is not necessarily true. And vice versa, from a buyer point of view, we are partnering with an external partner without necessarily making them see the full picture, because we don't find it necessary. We don't estimate that company needs to know exactly that level of details about our business. Now, when it comes to the relationship and the partnership that I have with our external partners, I think, for example, there are opportunities for them to either sell me a very, very healthy and very pretty image of the company, of themselves, and of how they behave and how they work. Or they have the opportunity to share with me the transparent vision of how things work and how and what happens on their side.
Yeah.
And if there is a problem, it's a problem for both of us, not for them.
I agree with that.
So that's the kind of dynamic that I encourage. Transparency in terms of don't butter me up with a concept that is not true just because you need to make me happy. My happiness comes from receiving a healthy partnership, not from being convinced that something is working. On the other side, I return the favor by letting them understand what is the strategy that I have in mind. If I have in mind to change something significantly, which will have an impact on their functioning or on their financial, on their organization, I need to do it as soon as I start thinking about it. Because obviously, without sharing with them anything that would scare them for nothing, because if there is something that I am thinking but I'm not planning on moving forward with, I don't worry about that. But if I have a new strategy and I want to make sure that is implemented, I start talking to them and say, in the next 12 months, that's where we're going. So let's start working together on it. If you're not ready, we can talk about it over and over and over again until at one point you understand what I'm trying to achieve. But this is the effect of just jumping on a call a week before and say, these are the changes. That's the problem that I think that sometimes our LSPs find themselves into. The fact of being presented with the situation, saying this is what it is, without understanding the reasoning, what drove the decision making, and what is the plan for the future, and how we can make our partnership as healthy as possible. If I take something away from an external partners without making them understand that I will be focusing on growing our partnership in other ways or in other areas, I can't expect them to have the same investment as before. So the conversation, the communication, and again the word, I understand your point, Paula, the word transparency in terms of giving them really the opportunity to see where the context and the logic behind is very important.
Can I also just ask you maybe to explain where the difference is between partnership and outsourcing with you?
I think that the main difference for me is sharing the common goal.
Okay.
If something is successful for both, it's a very healthy partnership. If I am trading a service for money, it's outsourcing. So,
thank you.
I have in my past I have had opportunities to experience both, and sometimes outsourcing is just necessary. Not everything needs to be a deep-rooted partnership with a company, but sometimes for example, in the past, I happened to partner with some contingent staffing providers that were providing agents or coordinators or people that have that are required to do some important and manual tasks. So that relationship with that company probably, in my experience in those cases, was more related to outsourcing.
I understand.
Actually, the research and the identification of resources that were supposed to do a specific job, and without necessarily a massive amount of growth and involvement, engagement beyond that task. That was outsourcing.
Thank you.
And just to circle back on transparency, the term and what it means, actually, I never use the word transparency. I use the word honesty, because honesty is as a buyer, you cannot always tell everything to your suppliers, because there is some confidential information, etc. But at least what you say to your suppliers must be honest. You cannot say the whole truth, but you can say what you say has to be true. That's really where I think there might be a difference between transparency and honesty. Because when I hear transparency, people think that they will know everything. Transparency is like it's all transparent, and when you say honest, you can say, well, I'm going to be honest, but I don't promise you to tell the whole truth. So that's how I experience the word transparency myself. But it's just a personal.
Maybe I'm just an old cynic, but if somebody sits in front of me and says we're going to be transparent, I immediately assume they're not. This is my point. It's just, I don't know why we need to even... No, sorry, we're getting completely too bogged down in that word. It was me just being a bit pedantic. I'm the opposite. I actually assume, why would you not tell me what I need to know? Or why would I not tell you? I don't get the logic of it, but hey-ho. We're all different in the world.
No, it's different experiences. I mean, that's the beauty of the world. So everyone has a different experience. So that's I just wanted to circle back on your current challenges and your current opportunities as well, because for me, every time there is a challenge, there is an opportunity following. So for me, there is always, it's like the yin and the yang, or the black and the white. There is always the big picture is made of opportunities, but also challenges. When, of course, everybody talks about AI and generative AI. Generative AI is really what matters the most for the language industry. When you are considering or even implementing generative AI in your operations, I'm just curious to know if you see or if you consider AI as a sort of big block that you put in your ecosystem, like a new block in addition to a TMS, in addition to terminology databases, etc., or if you see it like a tea bag in this mug. You put the tea bag, and actually the AI becomes infused in your ecosystem. And actually, AI, for instance, can be a very nice duet with machine translation. And so that's my perspective. I'm from the second school, if I can put it like that. But I know some people, I talk to, they say, well, no. For me, it has to be a big block like TMS. So I want to see it put like, black on white. But I see, for me, it's like my tea bag in my mug. I see that AI has to be infused. But I'm just curious to know how you see it.
I love the metaphor of the tea bag. First of all, I never thought about it, and I really like it. I definitely am aligned with you, Bruno, on the second concept. I think that it's a very, very powerful technology, and it can be used in so many different ways that, considering it in a monolithical way, like I'm gonna put it here, and this is the role that it's going to play, is a little bit limiting, and it reduced opportunities and success. The one thing that I want to mention first, though, because that really matters to me, especially with the role that I have, is that the most important thing is that we also try to use it as ethically and as responsibly as possible. This is what I mention this very often, both in my company and outside, because I have the impression that we currently have we have a documenting, a factual trend in our society to deploy exciting technology without thinking of the impact that this will have in the future. And that ends up into blowing up in our face very, very quickly with the search engine, with social media, with a lot of different things. And now AI will probably follow the same path. Now, in my industry, that is extremely important. So using AI in a very ethical and responsible way is important because in the music industry and the localization industry together, they carry the responsibility of creating something that it didn't exist before. How do I create that and how do I allow technology to help me, and what responsibility technology and I have in order to make it in the right way is the most important part. I'm going to make a very basic example, which is in Spotify as a platform, we have multiple verticals and multiple services. It's not only music, it's music, which is very important. And fortunately, music is a universal code that doesn't need to be translated or localized. But we also have podcasts, for example. And the podcast is presented in the language of the speaker, and only in that language. Now, making podcasts available in other languages is all of a sudden possible thanks to AI, because it's scalable, it's affordable, it's realistic, but it's also complicated because it means that we are making a person speak in a different language without having them without necessarily having them sign off on every single word that they say, because we're taking the responsibility of giving them the words in another language, and that is complicated. So before jumping into that roadmap, we need to understand how to make it regulated and to make it as safe and as ethical and responsible possible. Once that's figured out, for me, is the playground. We start playing with technology in the most creative way possible, combining with existing technology, combining with human effort, or as a standalone technology in multiple use cases, not only as a replacement or an alternative to machine translation, but also to generate content wherever possible, to fix human mistakes when is necessary, or to summarize content, to categorize content, to add a quality layer, a quality step to our production process, to delegate QA stages in operations to a machine instead of doing it for a human. All these kind of things can happen in different environments and shaping, modeling, and adapting technology to the needs and to the tech infrastructure the company has. I think that the other aspect is very important is, for me, Spotify is understanding if the current set of technology in the industry is what I want to access, or if there is something that we can do in Spotify to develop the technology, and so the eternal conundrum between purchase versus build.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I love the reference to podcast, because
I love podcasts.
They were me too. But there were so many in the past. There were so many podcasts that were told, to be great, but I couldn't understand because it was in Spanish or in Russian, and I couldn't understand the people who were talking. And now with AI, just to be able to understand what people are saying about what they do or about their country, whatever, and using AI, this is a concrete and tangible sort of value that AI can create for your customers in Spotify, because that's something that customers can enjoy immediately. So
I actually have, my favorite podcast is an American podcast, and when they moved onto the Spotify platform, they've actually since very recently moved from Spotify over to Wonderly. But I remember about a year and a half ago, they were talking about there's two hosts, a prominent male American actor. I don't know which one of you know which one I'm talking about, but and his co-host is a younger female. But they were talking about Spotify then expanding the range to different languages, and they were actually in detail on their podcast speaking about. And now I'm listening to you talking about it, thinking, "Oh, that's what they meant."
Yep.
So, I suppose back to you and working at Spotify and Spotify itself. What do you think is unique about Spotify for people that are working there? So, as the employee experience.
I think the company culture inside inside the business is incredible. There is a lot of attention on how we treat employees, how we consider employees, the space of the employees, the company values in terms of the inclusion, the diversity, the respect, the values that are promoted inside the company are very, in my opinion, very healthy and very important. There is a huge attention to talent, so the recruitment process is very, very
torturous.
Yeah, it's the right size to really, in my opinion, target the profile and the talents and the role that is looked for. And the other thing that I really value is it's a company that has always presented themselves as pioneer. Yeah. And researcher and moving the bar. The concept of Spotify was already a massive revolution for the music industry in a moment where the music industry was falling apart because of the download, the torrents, and the crack that the industry was seeing in their functioning. There are some critiques of what the Spotify product has brought into the music industry, but it is undeniable, in my opinion, that it brought a lot of advantages and a big development from where we were when we were before Spotify. So I am a very big fan of the product. I think it brought a lot of good and a lot of the development of the Spotify product and the Spotify business was always carried on by people who have always in mind the next step, the revolutionary step that was changing things in a specific industry. And it's visible now because all the executive leaders of Spotify, they are also game changers in other domains, in other aspects, in other industries, because they are passionate about making an impact and making a change wherever they go and whatever they do. So that is absolutely reflected in the company. I think that there is a lot of attention in questioning what we can do better and how we can evolve in a responsible, ethical, and conscious way, using technology and using innovation in order to make our lives and everybody's lives a little bit better and a little bit more interesting. So I think that is something that I really value, and is an image that the company is trying to send out as much as possible in multiple communication channels.
How many people work at Spotify in total?
Around 8,000, I believe.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and something that very few people know is that it's a Swedish company, because many people think that Spotify, it must be American or British, but actually no, it's been created in Sweden, and that's that's
something new.
Well, no, it's I always knew it because I checked the profile of the company, but when I talk about Spotify to people, they really believe it's American. It must be a startup, created somewhere in the Bay Area. No. It's born in Stockholm, so it's really.
It's our headquarters in Stockholm, and it's a fantastic building in the city center of the city. All employees are actually have the chance to visit, because one of the great things that Spotify does for their employees, that everybody who is hired is asked to, if they can, to participate to the intro days. So usually in the first year of your employment, there are 2 intro days, which are a week, where all the new employees are brought into Stockholm and they meet with the executive leadership, with Eck, our CEO, with Martin Stevenson, and all the executive leaders, and they learn about the story and that is behind Spotify. They meet the leaders. They kind of really start understanding what the company values, the culture, and what the company is all about. And it's a great opportunity to network, to meet new people, and to visit the headquarters. It's a great experience.
Yeah, that's really great. So I like one of the best onboarding experience that I've heard, because it's more than just saying welcome. Everybody company says welcome, but you are. I mean, Spotify takes it very seriously, and it's really
very much.
Yeah.
So I suppose if we just look now maybe at the future. So in 12 months' time, if we were talking again, it'd be great if we were. But where do you want to be? I suppose more from a professional perspective. So what do you want to be saying in 12 months' time? This is what I've achieved, my team has achieved. That, so you put a pin in the map in September 2025.
I was very lucky because when I joined Spotify, I joined a team, a localization team that not only is extremely talented and have a lot of talent in the team, but it was also led in a very good way. So a lot of work was already done. When my predecessor did a fantastic job in shaping the localization service inside Spotify. I think that in my 12 months ahead, what I really would like to achieve is to reposition a little bit the team and the concept of localization in the company. We spent a lot of time this year trying to fix some of the operational functioning and the dynamics that needed a little bit of fixing and a little bit of adjustment. And I think that next year we are well prepared and equipped to start moving a little bit towards changing the impact that localization has on the company. I think that today we are extremely focused on making sure that all the localization requirements are met. Tomorrow, I would like to make sure that we try to go beyond the requirements and the requests, and we start proactively suggesting change and improvement and opportunities to the business to consider in order to evolve. One of the aspects that I'm very focused on, which is something that the company really value, and I smiled earlier when Bruno was mentioning my experience in Expedia first and in Spotify after. One of the things that makes my experience quite similar in those two companies is the attention that both of the companies have on the cultural relevance. The importance that the product needs to take into consideration when it goes into a market. Speaking the right language, presenting the product from an image point of view and from a display point of view and a cultural point of view in the right way in a market goes a million miles farther than doesn't, because it convinces and it basically wins the trust of the end consumer. So it's something that I think that localization needs to absolutely take into consideration. When I was working for Expedia, a lot of competitors in Expedia they present their product in quite a standardized way in terms of imaging, in terms of colors, in terms of language, in terms of the product itself. Expedia have always tried to diversify and differentiate the presentation of their brands depending on the markets that they were talking, to the point that going to the website in Expedia in Japan, in Mexico, and in Italy presented different pictures, different shapes, different organization of the UI and of the product. And I think that's very important because it brings a lot of attention to the brand and to the company, and it talks much more directly to the end consumer. In Spotify, there is a massive effort and a massive attention on that aspect too. Spotify is localized in 74 languages. It's incredibly large as an effort. Very little products and company in the market they do the same. This is what this is an example of what I was referring to when I talked about my predecessor's job, is that they launched Spotify in language in markets that sometimes are either overlooked or potentially not considered an opportunity.
Okay.
The app is localized in Galician, in Catalan, in Basque, in four different flavors of Arabic, in multiple languages in the Africa continent. So the point is really to try to make the app reaching the end consumer in the right way, and there is a lot of attention and effort in there. So, in going back to your question, apologies if I diverted a little bit. My focus will be to carry on that work to make sure that Spotify is as much as possible culturally relevant for all the markets that we work with, and even more in the future potentially. Because we actually work in 185 countries across 75 languages, 74 languages. So quite a significant effort, and make sure that the services that we work with, music, podcast, audiobooks, and now recently courses, because there is in the English markets, Spotify have launched the learning and courses vertical. We try to make sure that they are I want to make sure that the localization is used as a enabler and a capability to make those services as successful as possible across the markets.
And a growth opportunity.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So the one thing that I am very happy about is also that the team localization in the buyer side is always a little bit of a question mark, is where does the localization sit? Because sometimes it goes into marketing and retail, sometimes in products, sometimes in customer success and UX. Depends on the company focus. I don't think that there is a right place to put localization, because eventually localization, if we're lucky enough, and I have been so far, serve the entire company. So we are working with everybody. So if I sit in product, I need to work in marketing and with HR and with customer service anyway. But in Spotify, it sits in the product part and in the design subgroup of product, and I think it's an excellent place to be, because it connects with the whole design and architecture of the product itself, but it's extremely connected also with all the marketing and the engagement part of the business. So next to localization, there is also the digital asset management and visual merchandising part of the business, which are very important as well. And we create this sort of acts of cultural relevance together to make sure the product is always well perceived. That is an incredible asset for us to be partnering together.
That's fantastic. In a previous life, I was going to be partner in a firm of accountants in a very previous life. And it's interesting, different organizations can sometimes see certain divisions or departments as cost centers, and it can be quite difficult for the leaders of those teams to push the plans to the key stakeholders and decision makers. So it sounds like you're in an enviable position in Spotify in that regard.
I am. Again, as I said before, I have been in the company for 10 months. So I keep considering myself a little bit new, but everything that I experienced so far is extremely positive. It's a great company to work with and to be part of. And I feel very pulled in from the company values and the vision and the mission that our leaders have on where the company is going. Okay. I like the way it's administrated, and I like the dynamics that there are in the company. There is a lot of for lack of better words, transparency, partnership, cooperation, and I don't know if the Swedish culture has anything to do with it, but it's definitely something that is definitely something that brings a great a great atmosphere and great environment to work with.
Yeah, no, it's and I'm glad that you mentioned that your objective is to take localization higher and further, both onwards and upwards. Because I had a question for you also about the future. Because I see when I was working in my previous companies, I always tried to move localization or language management teams from a cost driver or cost center into a profit driver, which is a long way, a difficult way. But now I see that as a consultant, I see that a number of organizations want to do the same, because for me the question is not really so much about where localization sits, but what localization does. Because you can do great things if you are in IT or e-commerce or product management. What I see now is that, and I would like to get your perspective on that, is that the companies I'm working with are considering that, okay, localization is important, because that's my job as a consultant, is to tell them that it is important, and to prove it, to demonstrate the value. But also that, I tell them that for me there is no real answer. For me, my personal recommendation is that localization is nicely positioned in product management or in business processes. But okay, if there are no division like that, it can be anywhere. But for me, the most important point is that localization has to be in the supply chain that is going to produce the content or the product. So every company has at least one supply chain. And a supply chain is made of different roles and functions. You have the designers, the developers, the UX people, and there has to be also the localization people in this supply chain, which starts from the creation to the delivery. And I say, well, if you want to take localization further and higher, you should really make sure that your localization team is part of this supply chain, whether we talk about content or products. I realized that now my advice was pretty right, because a number of several companies have just followed my advice to sell. We need to avoid that localization is just floating around, and that localization is integrated and celebrated, as I mentioned in a recent article, in the supply chain, because then in the supply chain, localization can be recognized just as much as the UX people, as much as the designers, etc. What is your opinion about that? Do you think that, when you want to take localization further and higher, it can still be sort of outside the supply chain? Or do you believe, like me, that it should be in the supply chain?
I think that I agree with you, Bruno, at least to a certain extent. The most important thing is to remember, in a company like Spotify or like Expedia, I experience some people feeling frustration about the lack of recognition that sometimes localization gets.
Yep.
And I personally believe that recognition happens when we educate people and make them understand what is our point of view. We can't expect leaders and departments in a company as large as Spotify or Expedia to absolutely assume and fully understand the potential and the impact that localization has, unless we frame it and we present it in a digestible way. So my job is laser focused on that part. And that's also a vision for the future, to make people understand how valuable localization can be or is already in the functioning of either their services or overall in the company. Part of the supply chain, yes. In most of cases, yes, 100%. I would even push it towards sometimes become a little bit even not necessarily a supply chain, but even potentially a driver of decision making of strategies. Localization has the position and ability to advise and consult for the business on market preferences, opportunities. A basic one, for example, in Spotify is the role that we play in identifying opportunities to make our music initiatives relevant for the market. So we do something for the Diwali event, for the and for different cultural events around the world. Now we can't expect the company or all departments to immediately and always be sensitive to those aspects. We want to make sure that they understand that we can make a difference in helping them shaping their strategy, shaping their decision making in a way that is more effective for the markets that we are targeting and for the business that we are trying to promote. It is, I'm not going to deny that it has been my biggest challenge to directly tie and link localization with business metrics and results and impacts is what makes my role, in my opinion, complicated and challenging. There are ways. There are colleagues of mine that are very successful with it. In my opinion, it's very delicate because there are a lot of assumptions. There is a lot of there is a lot of confusion sometimes on how to effectively actually prove that it was a localization who made that, who had that impact on that specific initiative. There is a lot of testing happening. We obviously start with looking at localization and try to understand wherever we might have an impact on traffic, on visibility, on number of clicks, on revenues, or SEO ranking, on multiple aspects that make the company successful. And then potentially from there, try to understand how we can evaluate what happened right before and right after the localization effort. A/B testing is definitely one of the most useful tools that we have, together with feedback and sentiment analysis and UX data. Anything that can help us understand is the language that you're reading and or listening to making a difference in the way that you consume the product that we have. That is 100% the role of a localization leader in a company like Spotify.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I've learned a lot.
No, I think it's a great conversation because, you know, Tomaso has really shared his perspectives on many things: technology, people management, the future, so it's great because now people will hear and will see, okay, this is what Tomaso is doing, this is what Tomaso is thinking. So next time we meet him, we have to be careful.
The other thing as well, though, for me, this has been you've been very concise. So you appear to me to have a particular skill, and this is the real recruiter head on me here. You have a particular skill around segmenting the messaging, and you keep it very concise, which makes it very easy for us and hopefully easy for the listener.
Plain language as well. I mean, using, simple words that, I mean, I knew it, but it's a demonstration that you talk to people who don't always understand localization. You have to use words that they can understand. And, you know, I was always advising people to avoid even the word localization and to talk about local adaptation or language adaptation, because localization, you know, some people were saying, localization, it's my GPS in my car. This is also localization. So sometimes simple words can have more effect than,
I remember
terminology.
The first time the word localization was introduced to me, I've owned and run recruitment agencies in different sectors for a number of years, and this man approached me, and he had been working as a sole agent, as a recruiter for years, and wanted to come in-house, you know, for his last 10 years, his last hurrah. And he was telling me that he was a localization recruiter. And I'm lucky in my professional background and training. I've had access to so many different business models because of my first career, and lots of different business terminology. I had no idea what he was talking about, and I actually said to him, I am so sorry, I have no idea what that even means. And that probably says more about me than the industry.
Yeah, it's interesting to, it's a small exercise during workshops, at least in my workshops, is that I put the word localization on a flipboard and I ask people to give me synonyms of localization. Some of them are talking about local adaptation, local experience. They use other words, plain language, to avoid the term localization, and it's interesting to see how people are defining localization in just one or two words. So.
I was actually trying to work out, is it relevant or not? But in fact, it probably is relevant if you're trying to sell your services out to a market, to people that, that are buying the service and are going, what? I don't know what does that mean, and how does that hit my bottom line? Anyhow, so I suppose.
Thank you. Funnily enough, I think that I have always had probably the opposite problem. I try to improve and be concise and segmented in my conversations, because I don't know if it's the Italian in me, but very often I tend to go a little bit beyond the scope of the question in order to speak more. And probably career shapes you in a certain way. I think that the only thing that I might wanted to add is right now, a lot of people are talking about AI. Everybody is, and I think it's fair, because it's the biggest and most important topic that there is in the industry right now. However, I also think that this doesn't necessarily or shouldn't distract us from also other topics, which, in my opinion, are at least important, almost equally important as AI. I had the opportunity in the last few months to attend small events and conferences where we had the opportunity to talk about what are the things that are when we are facing a challenge, what are our priorities with other localization leaders from the buyer side, interfacing maybe with some leaders on the LSP side. I think that I hope that in the future, in 2025, we will see localization, focusing on AI and on a lot of other things, because there is still a lot of work to do in a lot of different areas, in the quality side, on the platform side, the TMSs, and the conversation that I ended up into a couple of times this year about what is the future of TMS. Yeah. Where are we going with the translation management system as a platform like that? Do we still need a platform that is so comprehensive, or now with the AI or other technology we can figure out something different? The scene that we are seeing around the world of LSPs, who are the main player, what are the LSPs focusing on, the size of the LSPs that is changing, and the approach they have, what priorities they have, and how buyers react to that scene and to that scenario, because we're not necessarily a driver. Sometimes we also receive and adapt as well. All these topics are extremely interesting, in my opinion, and they are subjects that are maybe a bit less shiny than AI, but they are embedded in our everyday working, and I hope we will see more opinions and more inputs on them as well, because there is obviously a lot of opportunity and potential for people to share their views and inputs on it.
That's a very valid point.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's essential actually to look at all facets of localization, not just the AI or not just the tech side, but also the operational side, the people side. And indeed, I mean, it's you mentioned quality. I use effectiveness instead of quality, but effectiveness is a topic I'm talking about every day, because people are saying, okay, how do you advise, measuring effectiveness? And I said, well, there is no single answer. Is that what is your business? What are your objectives? Based on that, I can draft a list of KPIs that will really matter for you. But of course, there is no single answer. Is it good? Is it bad? It's those answers are just difficult.
Maybe AI eventually will not become a topic, but simply it will be in all topics, and we will go back talking about quality and platform and metrics, efficiency gain, recruitment, and talent, new linguists coming out of our universities, and how they study and they get prepared for the localization industry. Project management, program management, product management, and so on and so forth. And AI will be in all these conversations because, as we said before, it's a tea bag, right? It will affect a little bit everybody.
That's the point in the match, that phrase.
Yeah, no, it's very true because, I mean, for instance, sometimes people don't see the connection between AI and data strategy. And I said, well, if you don't have any data strategy, you will not have AI. It's as simple as that. You know, data for AI specifically is a must. It's not something that you can say, well, we'll see later, or, you know, it's not too important. No, because AI cannot live without data and without proper data, of course. That's so sometimes topics seem to be unrelated, but they are very much related. So that's really, and you mentioned program management. That's another one. I like it because indeed, program managers with, AI-driven localization, let's say, will have different responsibilities than program managers who are just, sending files and receiving files. So it's just, So the future is bright.
The future is bright. Well, I believe so.
Okay.
Aren't we all fortunate, the three of us sitting here?
Absolutely.
Healthy individuals. We're very blessed people, I believe. So I think that is it for us. And I want to say another big thank you to Tommaso Rossi, again, who is the Director of Localization at Spotify. And you've been very gracious with your time and the information you've shared and your contributions. And I do think the big takeaway is the teabag analogy. That's definitely the winner for me.
100%. I want to thank you both for giving me this opportunity, for having me, for listening to me, and for asking me all these questions. Very, very honored and humbled to be here, to share my experience, my views of localization, of the future, and what we can not only expect, but most importantly, I never loved the experience. What we can we expect for the future? Don't expect anything. We make it, but at least to a certain extent. So what we can make the future look like in the coming years,
and embrace it.
Yes,
rather than sitting on the sidelines. Just embrace.
Yeah.
So thank you very, very much for this conversation, which is very, very interesting.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much.